Today I'd like to talk about my first job as an adult. I don't know whether I was 17 or 18 or 16 or 17, not sure, but anyway, somewhere in that period. I spent 2.5 summers working at a company called Safeway Steel Scaffolding. And it's essentially erecting scaffolds upside buildings, inside churches, outside to paint with or wherever. It could go hue up, way up or a little bit, like a TV tower or something like that. And we built everything with the scaffolding. At a crew of 9, I was all black from the Hill District, basically, and me. And of course, me being white, the boss, George Grazerchuk, was white as well. This was fine. I got there and no problems. And what I learned, it was a pretty important lesson for me. I would watch how we'd go to a job, like we're going to throw up scaffolding inside of a church, right? Big tracks, so they could paint it or repaint it. And you had to be careful because you couldn't drop anything. If you're working on the river, you could drop steel into without getting killed. But when you drop steel into wood, it damages it. So we had to be very careful. And oftentimes it was dangerous because if the tire would shift, when someone up there with some weight on it would go down. So I watched the engineers would come out and tell us how to do this building, and they would all laid out and all done and everything. And then the crew would look at it, and I didn't know what they were looking at, but they were looking at the plans of how to build this scaffolding, and they said, "Oh, we'll just do it our way." Just on their own. They would say that practically every time we did a big job. They just said, no, the engineer. So I found out in that process that those men were more talented than the trained engineer. They were not paid anywhere near what that engineer made. And yet they were the better for their company than the engineers because they saved them from making mistakes in which a scaffold falling down, hitting a car or a person, or destroying a tree, or a child playing ball or something. They saved, I would guess, the jobs that I worked on practically every one. They did not do what the engineers told them to do. They set it up themselves. And so it was on this crew that I worked, and I really liked the guys. They were great, and they were sort of understanding. I'm 5'8", and some of the scaffold I could just barely reach up and hold it up and get to the truck. Just didn't like us, I guess. Does it come out of the wire?
No.
I think there could have been, no, that one stayed on, so it wouldn't be electrical power. Did you put on a timer, maybe?
Um, wow. That's here, Jim. I don't think we blew a fuse. It's not a high powered, not a high draw on that.
You want me to get down and check?
Um,
There you go. There you go.
ah,
It's that old outlet, those old
yeah, let me
outlets.
switch this other one. Maybe it'll grab better. There we go. We're
Yeah.
back. I thought the light went poop on us there.
And I was, do you remember more than me? Where was I? On the crew.
Yeah, they do it their way, not the
Oh,
engineer's
yeah.
way.
Okay. Tell me when I can start again.
Go ahead.
So in this summer job of 2 summers and 2.5 summers, I think all told, I enjoyed working there, and I learned that as you look at a corporation that thinks it's making money off its engineers, it's not really making it off them at all. It's working off the employees who who were just working for barely good wages. It was quite a lesson for me, and but I got to try. I could build those scaffoldings and claw up on them, and no, they treated me very fairly. That crew of 9, they were great to me. And so this one day, normally every day I'd go for the lunches for everybody, which was on the other side of the street, across an alley and up a street. And I said to George one day, George, can I not go today for lunch? I'm not feeling so good. And let someone else do it today. And he called me over to his desk. He waved at me, come over, I'll talk to you. So he said, these guys can't go over there. I said, I mean, they can't go over there. He said, well, they won't serve them. You have to go. I said, okay. So I went over there and I asked, and sure enough, they said, no, we won't serve blacks in this place. I'm like, really? And I'm like, 16, 17. This it it caused dissonance in my head, that's for sure. And so that was a awakening, like that rattles you and wakes you up to injustice, and how clear and easy it is for people to be unjust to another people. And that was quite a lesson for me. So I was glad I had that job. It taught me seriously more about justice, that job alone, than a lot of my schooling. Um, it really that impacted me that day. I never forgot it. I went home and told my mother. So my only answer was, "You keep getting lunches, Jack." She didn't want them to get in trouble because they were pretty darn nice to me. Um, I'd like to talk about Young World Development. It was the youth arm of the Freedom from Hunger campaign in Rome, the Food Agriculture Organization. And it was interesting because we had free offices and free phones. That's all we got from the government. But we turned about 12 to 15 million dollars from 68 to 73, 74, something like that. And what we did was essentially mobilize across the country brilliant young kids who were just fabulous, both college and high school. Most of them were high school. Um, and they'd walk 28 to 32 miles, raise so much per mile. The interesting thing that I did and they did together was that we would we'd move more to high schools than colleges, and because in college the parents are already spending a lot of money, they're not going to donate a lot to walk per mile. Whereas in high school, they're glad to have their kid doing something good, so they'd give the child a lot of money to go walking one day, and that's how we were so successful um, at that. We mobilized across the country. We probably raised 12 to 15 million with if I remember correctly, 301 walks. Our biggest were in Chicago, 100. The single largest one was Buffalo, probably 105,000 marchers, but 35,000 in Madison, Wisconsin, same in Minneapolis. We were doing great, really great. And we were catching the attention. The funny thing about it is that we promoted and allowed and encouraged that the local people who are doing the walking and getting it organized would make the decisions about projects, as long as they did some at home and some abroad, and we would get 15% for our support of the whole thing. And they did. It was amazing how progressive they were. We funded the American Indians quite a bit, Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi quite a bit, anti-apartheid efforts in Frelimo, and I think they were fighting from, what was it, from Tanzania then, Guinea-Bissau, same in, so against anything against apartheid. So it's a progressive movement, and when we funded everything on the international side, Church World Service, Lutheran World Service, it was a plethora of good working international organizations. We funded them quite a bit of money. half of what we raised. And they would often come to me and say, "Well, I want to. How do we get the next year's walk?" And I'd have to say, "Well, you have to go to this high school and talk to this junior in high school who was a sophomore last year, now a junior. They're going to make the decision." And they'd look at me like, "Are you crazy? What do you mean they make the decision?" And I said, "Well, that's how we do it." So nobody really could get a handle on how to affect those local groups without talking to kids somewhere between 15 and 14, 15 years old to maybe 23, 24. It was amazing. Um, but the power of it was, in some ways, we were bigger than the anti-war movement because we were organized, where the anti-war movement came out of the spirit to fight the war. We were actually mobilizers of it. And we won 2 awards that got us in some deep trouble with the Nixon administration. One is Bob Peterson was asked to speak at a World Food Conference in Rome, and he did. He saw me beforehand. He said, "Jack," and I said, "Bob, you always speak so fast. Speak slowly. Whatever you're going to say, just take your time. You're really good. You're smart." So this 16-year-old kid gets up and he announces that the United States stole the black man from Africa and put the stolen black man on the stolen red land, and that created an empire. And this got a raging support of that audience, except for the Republicans who were there, and they threatened to leave FAO or get rid of me or whatever was causing this problem. Where it was just a young kid who had his own opinion about the world and was highly read. And so that we had some hassle over that with them about that. It scared a lot of people. So, but it came and went. And then Debbie Sweet, who happened to be his neighbor right behind him, living in Madison, Wisconsin, got an award as a presidential award by Richard Nixon himself. So Debbie and I spoke about it, and we agreed that she was going to receive it because she didn't necessarily want it, but her parents did, and it would be nice for the parents. And so we agreed we'd go to the White House and do that. And so we get in there, and there's a lot of people behind, waiting for this event to occur, waiting for the president, who actually later went to jail. I don't know, there was a lot of them in there, Deans, and I forget all their names. I have to see their faces again. J. Edgar Hoover was in there. Um, I forget who else was there, but it was Storm Thurmond from South Carolina, and a lot of conservatives. And so the president comes in, he starts putting that on people, and it goes very well, no problem. But then all of a sudden, he gets to Debbie and he turns around and like he had a great idea. And he said, "Well, the good kids are in here, and the bad kids are out in the streets." And turns to put the medal back on Debbie. And before he could do that, she said, "Mr. President, I can't trust you until you end the war in Vietnam." And with that, Richard Nixon just got rattled, didn't know what to do, stunned, and then exited out of the room immediately, just tore out of the room. So we went out to a huge press conference. They later, I don't know whether it was connected, but I think it was. I had some feeling it was, is they came after my taxes and they found out. And then in the priesthood, I was a Franciscan. Um, we never really got any money. I didn't even know. So I wrote the cardinal in Baltimore and asked him what I was paid. I was paid $200 a month for 9 months of the year for my job. Um, and so I don't know what the taxes on that would have been. It would have been a whole lot. But they hit me with a tax of $300. So I go down to the IRS building and I'm sitting there talking to whatever manager I could get a hold of. And the nice lady said to me, "Mr. Healey, if I were you, I just would pay this and forget about it." So that's what I did. I paid it off, but I think I got hit personally. Then in the LA Times, we were front page runner. The Freedom from Hunger was stealing money. Of course, we weren't. We got it thrown out of court in about 10 minutes. Um, but that kind of broke the back of the Western regional plans that have been awfully large and are going to be awfully big and raise a lot more for world hunger and people like Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi. Um, and so I think in some sense the ability to mobilize the young people set up a new generation, because later when I was the Peace Corps director, I used to ask the incoming classes every time, how many of you are in a walk for development or raise money for, walking? And at least a third of them would put up their hand and say they did. And that's one of the reasons they were in Peace Corps. So I always thought it had some lasting effect as well. It's great to do something when you're young. And this is maybe a message to parents and young people. Don't wait till you get older to be good. Be good early on and talk about it and talk about justice. Because oftentimes we see it as you wait till you're an adult to do something, but you really ought to start goodness as soon as you can, because be a mendicant for the poor. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think there's a richness in a life that's well lived, following some sense of justice, some sense of trying to help with the common good, and trying to bring the Constitution in the real sense of it um, into life. And I always thought, I'll close with this thought, is I always thought John Lewis was like the walking U.S. Constitution. He was that good, and the Constitution was that good in its purity. And I always looked upon John as being the walking Constitution. So I used to tell him that it would embarrass him. But I think I saw the living document in his soul. He was a good friend of mine. I just wanted to remember him in this talk today. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Oh, good.